Now I would actually like to give the screen to Chiara Bonfiglioli. It's really nice to have you here. Chiara is a lecturer in gender and women's studies at University College Cork in Ireland. And she defended her PhD at Utrecht University and held postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Edinburgh, the University of Pula, and the Institute for Human Sciences, Vienna. Her research addresses transnational women's and feminist history, specifically focusing on the former Yugoslavia and Italy. She's also the author of A Woman and Industry in the Balkans, The Rise and Fall of the Yugoslav textile sector. So this is a definite must read for us. So Chiara, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irena, for the invitation. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well? Perfect. I would like to share the screen. So if I'll try to upload a PowerPoint if possible. Right, so you should all see my screen by now. And then just a second. All right, so yeah, so today I'm gonna talk about something a bit different than, I mean, it's part of the book Women and Industry in the Balkans, because of the focus of the symposium on regeneration. I thought, you know, I wanted to talk a bit about these initiatives that are happening around the issue of textile industrial heritage in former Yugoslavia. So I'm gonna be looking at the initiatives related to worker struggles and kind of initiated by mainly by artists or activists, younger activists who are kind of empathizing with the plight of industrial workers in the region. So, and then if you have, you know, more specific question on the factories themselves or the conditions of work during socialism or post-socialism, we can go in depth into that. But I just wanted to give a kind of overview of recent interventions in the field of industrial heritage more broadly today. So I will start by with this still from Firma. In 2015, the musical video Firma by the popular Croatian rock band Hladno Pivo showed workers from the industrialized factories taking center stage. And the refrain of the song symbolized the economic and social changes brought by post-socialist privatization and industrialization. The refrain of the song captures the economic and social changes of the last 30 years. God, homeland, nation, all freeze. This is privatization. Free up space for 200 families. And the song points in this way at the predominance of conservative ideology under the nationalist regime of Franjo Tudjman, who had famously announced that 200 families were supposed to take charge of the Croatian economy after the fall of socialism. Another verse of the song recalls how industrial companies collapsed without firing a bullet, namely without any workers' resistance. The video accompanying the song, however, adds a combative tone to the piece and relies on the aesthetics of workers' collective heroism, combativeness, and dignity. And if we have time at the end, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with this video, but I can play it at the end. I have a version with English subtitles. So if there is a bit of time, I'll just play it at the end. While members of the band sing in blue-collar factory outfits, industrial workers appear in the video as dignified subjects, reciting their own narratives in between the song. A Kamensko film worker opens the video, and this is her picture, stating, "We were good when we were enlarging the suits of politicians, even better when we sew a new one for them, as they could not fit the old ones. And where are we now?" This passage comes from a very real story of a finance minister who kept bringing his tailor-made suit to Kamensko textile workers for them to fix it because it was growing bigger and bigger, while workers in the meantime were growing thinner and thinner due to the fact that they were not receiving their wage. And the subsequent hunger strike they engaged with in 2010 was kind of putting them even more under pressure. As another worker declared during the strike, "When we were sewing in 3 shifts for the army during the Homeland War, then we were a European fashion house. When we were sewing tailor suits for the first Croatian president, we were also a European fashion house. But now when we ask for unpaid wages, we are only the house of European shame." The industrial heritage of textile factories with a predominantly female workforce is perhaps less visible than the heritage of a male-based heavy industry in Southeastern Europe, but it's nonetheless a very significant one, given that textile factories were one of the main sites of female employment, of industrial employment for working class women during the socialist period, symbolizing women's emancipation and the modernization of gender relations. Almost every small center in socialist Yugoslavia had its own textile factory. And when doing this project, when doing my research, almost every friend or acquaintance in the region had a female relative who used to work in a textile factory. So at the moment I would talk to any of my friends or any acquaintance, they would be like, oh, my granny used to work in a factory. My mom used to work in a factory. My aunt. There was always kind of 1 or 2 degrees of separation between the person I would be talking to and somebody working in a textile factory, just to give you a sense of the extent to which workers were involved in such factories. And when I was in Celje for that exhibition, when we were there together, Maya's grandma was also a worker in the Metka textile factory, and she's part of the book now. So that was a very nice, way to connect with her. So in the process of post-socialist transition, because the industry was so large before the end of socialism, during privatization and post-socialism, I would say 400,000 to 500,000 jobs were lost in the region, which is now extremely, and now production, textile production is still extremely limited in post-Yugoslav states, except maybe for Serbia and North Macedonia, which have around 40,000 employees. And then of course there is the whole issue of invisible employees and black work there. The process of industrialization and ruination, which affected textile factories and which resulted in a devaluation of women's industrial employment, has been at the core of different activist and artistic projects. And most of these initiatives, led by a younger generation of activists who came of age after socialism, have been aimed at uncovering the lost archives of the industrialized factories and the lost memories of former workers hit by privatization, often the mothers, sometimes the fathers, and usually the female relatives of the young activists in question. The younger generation are clearly interested in learning more about the social welfare and job security enjoyed by the older generation, which became almost unimaginable and difficult to articulate in contemporary post-Yugoslav societies, especially this thing of, you will get a flat or you will get free childcare and free healthcare. I mean, childcare not so much, but more like free healthcare and subsidized holidays. All these kind of welfare arrangements that existed during socialism, they sound, really science fiction at the moment. So that's something that really interests a lot of young people. And something similar happened in places like Poland, where Kinga Pozniak, in her ethnography of the post-industrial town of Nova Huta, has shown that young people are reviving the legacies of work and community ties in order to cope with increasing precariousness and unemployment. The initiatives that have taken place in the former Yugoslavia have also often denounced the criminal privatization processes characteristic of the post-socialist period, which has been particularly brutal in the former Yugoslavia due to parallel processes of economic and social dispossession during the breakup of the country and the Yugoslav wars. So here I'm going to discuss some intervention related to Croatia, where I did most of my fieldwork, in order to highlight younger generations' attachment to textile industrial heritage in post-Yugoslav states. I will address 3 case studies, so Kamensko in Zagreb, Arena Trikotaža in Pula, and Dalmatinka in Sinj. And when we look at Croatia, around 100,000 jobs were lost in the industry in the past 30 years, and very little remains today. So the 2010 strike of Kamensko workers in Zagreb is certainly the one that got the most significant media coverage in recent years. In late socialism, the factory employed up to 2,600 workers in its Zagreb plant. They had some kind of subsidiary plants elsewhere as well, and it exported mainly to Western Europe. In '93, the factory was privatized through the shareholder system, and after 2005, when the sale of factory shares to outsiders was permitted, one of the directors started to sell his share on the market, and construction companies bought most of these shares because the Kamensko factory building was located in a quite central area of Zagreb, which was kind of coveted by the local oligarchy for real estate speculation. After 2006, the factory started to accumulate losses as a result of intricate financial speculation linked to the usage of creditor firms that belonged, among others, to the infamous Bosnian Croat tycoon named Miroslav Kutle, which is a kind of icon of this criminal privatization processes. The stories are all very similar. You know, the shares start to be bought outside of the inner circle of people working there. Speculation starts, and then the wage payments started to be delayed for the remaining 400 plus Kamensko workers. Sometimes they will get an occasional payment to prevent them to going on strike. But in September 2010, after 7 months since the last wage was paid, a group of 20 Kamensko workers decided to go on a hunger strike in the park just across the factory, even though the trade union had suggested them not to do it because they said they might lose their job. Workers then decided to keep working, so they did the hunger strike at night in the park, and then they kept working during the day to make sure, you know, they were kind of not breaking any regulation, and they went on like that for 10 days. And despite the lack of union support, workers received support from civil society activists and students, especially since the real estate speculation linked to Kamensko were seen as connected to wider right to the city mobilization. This was a moment when there was a whole struggle around the Varšavska redevelopment in the city, where the new shopping mall was built in the middle of the center of Zagreb. And so there was kind of a lot of interest for this issue. And the Kamensko workers' struggle inspired at least 3 theater dramas. And the one, I put all the titles in my book. This one I'm looking at here is called Unbreakable Threads and was staged by director Lenka Udovicki in 2011 and involved Kamensko workers as actresses in the play. And there were a few others. So what happens in these pieces is that Kamensko workers and a number of well-known actresses and artists are involved, and the workers themselves are taking center stage and are kind of reciting their own stories. And the piece was advertised as follows in 2011. I'm translating from this poster. Every dignified life is a work of art. From Homer's Penelope, who defended her own independence and the sheer number of suitors with her weaving, through Aristophanes Lysistrata, who was a weaver and the first literary pacifist by profession, to Kamensko's textile workers, a dignified life includes the right to work and women's knowledge of how deeply intertwined our lives are. They say Ariadne's thread led Theseus out of the labyrinth. Kamensko workers with their professionalism are also looking for a solidarity thread to get out of the Croatia of war profiteers, non-experts and incompetent rulers. So it's really like very, very interesting how, you know, these Kamensko workers became some kind of heroine of femininity and through this idea of the thread and the weaving and Penelope and Ariadne, you know, there was this kind of new iconography of feminine resistance there connected to Kamensko workers. And they definitely had the most exposure when it comes to media and art interventions. Another less known but significant mobilization happened in the eastern town of Pula among the workers of the Rena knitwear factory founded in 1947, whose production was exported all over the world and which came to employ up to around 1,000 workers in late socialism. Arena was declared bankrupt in 2014 after several years of mismanagement and indebtedness, and I'm not going to go into the usual story. And again, there was an issue of real estate speculation because this beautiful building was on the Riva, on the front of the seaside front in the city. So it was very much an interesting building for redevelopment and gentrification of the city. The remaining 62 employees during the bankruptcy had to carry out a 3-month strike in spring 2014 to receive the official declaration of bankruptcy and to be able to receive social assistance as unemployed. Like Kamensko workers, Arena workers started striking out of desperation after their very low wage of around 300 euros were not paid for 8 months. Beside the workers who lost their jobs, the bankruptcy also hit hard the pensioners of Arena, who had placed their savings in the internal bank of the factory. So the factory had this internal bank for so many years, since the 60s, and the workers were encouraged to put their money in this internal bank. And many of them they did because they wanted the factories to succeed. And what happened is that all these pensioners who were counting on the money in this internal bank, they sort of lost everything. So there was really this process of economic and social dispossession, not just for the workers who lost the job, but also for the pensioners who lost their savings. And one worker, for instance, she was testifying to the local radio, that she had saved for 25 years and that her 5,000 euros disappeared without a trace, which was a lot for her. The value of the saving in the bank was estimated at around 800,000 euros, so about almost $1 million, while important amounts gathered from the sale of Arena shops, which were located all over Croatia, were also missing. Even if the Arena strike was less visible in national media than the Kamensko strike, Arena workers gathered a significant amount of local solidarity and media attention, particularly during this 8th of March 14 demonstration, in which striking workers, activists, and citizens gathered in front of the factory, denouncing the criminal privatization practices that brought Arena to bankruptcy, as well as the indifference or complicity of local politicians who were very much, focusing their whole efforts to strengthen the tourist sector, but not to maintain the few other jobs that are there during the winter. And the same happened now with the Uljanik shipyard, which recently closed, and there were around 2,000 male workers working in Uljanik, and the town now is very much empty, except for summer, because of even these Uljanik jobs are lost. So in a symbolic demonstration of attachment to the factory, the participants to the protest also wore Arena garments and engaged in one last catwalk on strike, so modna revija u štrajku. So they really walked with the clothes from the factory, which were seen as this kind of very elegant clothes that every woman in Pula should have. And during the catwalk, Pula photographer, activist, and singer Edna Jurcan sang the traditional Italian folk song La Lega, a song of struggle used among the female rice weeders of the Po Valley and showcased in Bertolucci's famous movie Novecento, which refrain states, "Although we are women, we're not afraid. For the love of our children, we join the union." After this event, and also as a result of other mobilizations, Pula saw the creation of Zbor Praksa, an activist choir that performs around Croatia in support of various protests and alternative events. And as you might know, Anna Hoffman has written a whole book about this new anti-fascist choirs all over the region, which are taking part in different events, May Day, Women's Days, and all these different events to mark certain commemoration related to women's and workers' struggles. Last example is the one of Dalmatinka. So Dalmatinka was a spinning mill founded in the 50s in the town of Sinj, 30 kilometers from the coastal city of Split. And initially, only very poor village girls went to work in this factory, while most of the community rejected young women's possibility to work outside the home. It was a very traditional milieu, so the factory was seen as immoral and as a kind of whorehouse because of the night shift. And it really took a long time for this idea of women to go out to the night shift to be accepted in the local community, but eventually the spinning mill grew to a factory of over 2,000 workers, contributing greatly to the development of the local region. Besides its avant-garde facilities, Dalmatinka sponsored the construction of housing for workers and of various sports facilities, including an Olympic swimming pool that is still seen as the pride of local inhabitants. During the war, due to the closeness to the front, the factory temporarily served as a refuge for the local hospital, including the maternity ward. So one former worker we met during our visit revealed that she had given birth within Dalmatinka in wartime. After the war, the spinning mill gradually accumulated debts and finally went bankrupt in 2001. And in 2004, it was bought by two Italian entrepreneurs who were in fact professional criminals who were supposed to relaunch production, but actually speculated on the whole company remaining assets and avoided paying workers for months until the factory was fully closed in 2008. The history and legacy of Dalmatinka has been researched in depth by cultural activists Nikola Križanac, Dragana Modrić, Jelena Pavlinušić, and Silvia Milić. So this group has been collecting archive material, personal photographs, and oral history interviews, and also produced a short documentary with former Dalmatinka workers. Most recently, in 2017, they organized a successful exhibition titled "What Did Our Dalmatinka Gave to Us? Što je nama naša Dalmatinka dala?" on the history of the factory. Countering societal amnesia about the socialist period, the project addressed issues of like housing, working conditions, community building, solidarity, and women's position in society. One of the curators, he said, workers' memories provide us valuable information for the young generation and models that can offer an alternative. Together with activists linked to the project, when I was in Sinj, I collected testimonies such as the one of Natasha, who stated, I'm quoting, Dalmatinka was the mother of all inhabitants of the city of Sinj and of its surroundings. She fed us, our children, our grandchildren, and we had a future. However, the war came and things did not stay like that. While we worked, there was welfare for all, possibilities, good wages, houses were built, and the future of our children was built. Now the factory is so abandoned, so pillaged, so destroyed that it is terrible and ugly to tell our children and grandchildren that we once used to work there. So when I visited Sinj in spring 16, the spinning mill was abandoned and in disrepair, and in late summer 18, the factory was eventually demolished to build a wedding hall in its place. I mean, not fully, but almost fully. It was this internal part was demolished. Young generations' renewed interest in workers' life in the socialist and post-socialist era is connected to recent social mobilizations, as well as to young people's daily experience of unemployment and precarious labor in contemporary post-Yugoslav states. The exploration of workers' existence in capitalist times is part of a wider interrogation on the meaning of life and labor in the post-industrial and post-Fordist era. Also, the dignity of industrial labor is being reaffirmed, and so is the sacrifice of the thousands of textile workers who engage in industrial labor in the past decades, as well as the fundamental role played by industrial sites in the modernization of gender relations and the affirmation of women as equal citizens. And I would add also there's also growing attention to issues of reproductive labor, because often these women were very much affected by this double burden of working outside the home and coming back home and working at childcare and reproductive work after doing the night shift and such. So there is really this awareness of how much these women have been, overworked, and how much of themselves they gave to the factory to build certain success. Such issues were hinted at by Croatian feminist artist Sanja Veković in a Nada Dimić project, SOS Nada Dimić, which was carried out on the facade of the building of the former Nada Dimić textile factory in the hometown of the artist in Zagreb. The factory, named after a young anti-fascist heroine killed in World War II, employed up to 1,700 women during socialism. In 2000, when Iveković illuminated the factory name in red neon across the facade, the company was subject to a bankruptcy procedure. Again, the stories are very similar. The building, an example of industrial architecture from 1910, had been abandoned for years. The artist also offered free legal advice in that process for the factory's female workers. The art project pointed to the multiple layers of memories that had been lost in post-socialist transition, namely the memory of women's anti-fascist struggle, Nada Dimić herself, but also the memories of women's industrial work during socialist times. To conclude, the industrial heritage of textile factories in Croatia and more generally in the post-Yugoslav space is very much alive and is being transmitted across generations to these days. The regeneration of industrial sites associated with textile production will have to take into account, in my view, the lived experiences and the industrial structural feeling of current and former textile workers, and the entanglement between deindustrialization, devaluation of female labor, and economic and social injustice, as well as workers' dignity, pride, and resilience in post-socialist times. So I think, it's important because, so far, I mean, it's not that there has been so much re-evaluation of this heritage in places like Croatia. There hasn't been much happening, but what happened was very much of this kind of gentrification and the building being, for instance, in Pula in the Arena factory, part of the building was reconverted into a pub, which is called the Shipyard Pub, and there are all these nice sleek pictures of the shipyard in this pub. It's like this kind of Irish pub, and then there is nothing about this textile factory that used to be there, and now even the shipyard is gone now. So it's really striking, this kind of sleek gentrification and how the workers are sort of disappearing in the process. Another piece of the factory, because it used to be a very big building, was turned into this private museum of olive oil, which is also now gone, and because of COVID, and of course, it wasn't viable during the tourist season. I think I'm not sure if they're gonna restart it, but that was also kind of pointing at this whole rural heritage of Istria and sort of kind of silence in this industrial heritage of the region, because that industrial heritage is seen as not so nice and not so productive when it comes to making the region a tourist hub. And okay, Istria at least has tourism, but other places don't have it. So at least some of the workers managed to reconvert themselves, and Istria also has this vicinity with Italy, so a number of workers could go and work as in the elderly care sector in Italy, which didn't happen for many others. So in that sense, in Istria it was not that bad in terms of options for the workers who lost their jobs. But still, like I think any project that wants to be sensitive about this workers' experience need to kind of take into account this enormous injustice that was made at the expense of workers. Many of them, they never got this unpaid wages and unpaid savings. So that's something to keep in mind. To say that's not only a Croatian story, it's also a story for other post-Yugoslav states. Do you want me to play that video, or do you want to watch it in your own time? Might be already spoken to much.
Yeah, a little bit, maybe just a second or two.
Okay, let me try. So close it.
This is also a convenient time if somebody has a question. If you wish, you can post it in chat, or you can just say it.
Okay, I'm just gonna play 1 minute or so. Just if you get a sense, if you haven't seen it, you get a sense of the aesthetics.
Stara nisu mogli stati, a gdje smo? Bile smo dobre kad smo političarima širile odjela. Još bolje kad smo im nova šivali, jer u stara nisu mogli stati, a gdje smo danas? Da se mi manje smeta.
Can you hear as well the song?
Nabijem krokse na noge bose, puštam da me same nose, istom rutom koji godinama prije. Ale on bolonje sve dok pustošije. Vuču firmu, podignuti sindikalnu zastavu koja mi je ostala brati formaru.
You can all watch it on YouTube. But I think it's interesting also that how there is very much this male aesthetics of heavy industry, but still they involve the Kamensko workers because their struggle was so important.
Thank you very much, Chiara. I wonder if somebody has a question for Chiara. Okay. I'm curious more about your research process. I'm thinking like you actually work a lot with personal stories, and this is what I'm curious about. Like how does your research process work? Like, do you meet all these people personally, or you are collaborating with certain organizations or unions, or how do you reach people when it comes to your research? And I think it's really relevant question actually when we think about industrial heritage, like in a context of, okay, we think what happens, what's the future of the building and so on, but it's of course, this is really crucial question, like, okay, what happened to the worker? and not only what happened, but also what will happen to the worker. And it's interesting that you know that some of the workers went to Italy to do this elderly care, for example, from Istria, or went into this tourist kind of profession. So I think this is really interesting, and I think I just wonder how do you get your information?
Yeah, so as I said, the textile industry, it's because there were so many factories and so many people connected to it. I mainly went through personal connections, like friends. In places like Zagreb, I relied, for instance, on this Udruga Kamensko, which was founded by some of the former workers, because in Zagreb it's much more difficult to find to have a direct connection with a factory, or with somebody. But in smaller places, I did research not just in Croatia, but in places like also Bosanski Novi, now called Novigrad in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Štip in Macedonia, North Macedonia, and there I had kind of personal connections, and the people that I knew could introduce me to their neighbors and friends and relatives, and that's how I made most of my interviews, really. And then there were sometimes organizations already in place, like in the case of Dalmatinka Sinj, there was already this project going on. So what I did was to rely on these activists to help me with the interviews as well. All right, so I feel my daughter is at the door crying. So if there's any other questions.
Okay, I understand.
I have one question, yes. Please. Do you, when you make your research and put focus on a former Yugoslavia or Balkan countries, is there any similarities or differences between that region and other post-socialist countries like, I don't know, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Holland, and whatever?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is just not, I think that in the former Yugoslav region, the specificity is that it was such a brutal transition because of the war and because of this criminal privatization process being very rapid. But in other places across Eastern Europe as well, you will have similar stories. And I'm quoting this passage from Svetlana Alexievich from her book. She's talking about Ukraine and this textile industry in Ukraine. So definitely, I mean, this is just something I couldn't cover because I focused on trying to do a comparison across the post-Yugoslav region. But there is definitely some similarities there.
Okay, if there is no more questions, I would like to thank Chiara. Thank you very much.